no matter what our day-to-day lives look like, we are always playing out archetypal roles, and those will become most present in our dreams, or more obvious in our dreams. I believe they become present in our life, but I feel like on the day-to-day, the way to keep in touch with those energies and to track them is through remembering dreams and working with dreams. I would say, we all access all the archetypes. And I think in different times of our lives, some come present more strongly. This dream to me is a mythic dream, as in it is a dream where I'm being shown the archetypal energies that are closest to me right now, that I'm working with right now. And it's kind of like a footnote or a tracking or a moment in not only my temporary day-to-day life, but my eternal timeline, where I'm being given a moment, a test, an opportunity to strengthen my spiritual forces in whatever way that means to me.
Okay. This dream is called Uninvited Guest. On a balcony with people having a dinner at night, all of a sudden a bunch of crows were descending down in slow motion to a tree in front of us. Feathers were floating in the air in slow motion, and it was really vivid and captivating. Then a giant bird was in the tree, kind of glowing green and other super bright colors, almost like a peacock or a tropical bird. The bird kept switching shapes and colors, and then that bird transformed into a person wearing all black. And he started talking to us on the balcony. We didn't fully trust him because he seemed suspect. He tried to go in the house, but we didn't let him. I felt a nagging suspicion. And so he left a bunch of crow bones and dropped them into our wine glasses one by one. It turned the drinks into a weird drink that was kind of orange-black. Then he began explaining the health benefits. And I remember thinking, F that, I'm not drinking it. Avery Hopkins, a famous modern alchemist, was sitting at the end of the table, and we looked over at him and he agreed with what he was saying. And so I sipped from the cup slower than everyone else. And one guy said he felt weird after drinking. So I spit it back in the cup right away, and then I woke up.
So the dreamer gave us some background information about this dream. We're going to share the background context with you now. So about the feelings, like how she felt about this dream, she said that she initially woke up and didn't remember, but she had the feeling that she wanted to stay in bed and let the dream come back. So she lay in bed, and after a few minutes, the whole dream came back, and she felt grateful because the imagery of the shape-shifting bird and the crow feathers and the crow bones in the wine were so interesting. She said she felt like she had avoided a major problem by not allowing him in the space, and also came close to having a problem by drinking the drink. And so this was all when COVID was still very much happening. And at that time in her life, she was working as a nurse in the community, doing vaccinations and receiving her own. She said she was also researching a lot about alchemy, and ancient spiritual practices related to healing. She said she felt a lot of spiritual connections to birds in her waking life and in her dream world, and she has a lot of dreams about birds in general. When we asked her about her personal associations, she mentioned the crow, and her personal associations with the crow were mystery, magic, death, and collective. And then she also listed bones. And her personal symbol for bones is death, strength, shape, and form. When we asked the dreamer what she wanted to know about this dream, she said she was curious who the shapeshifter was, and if she was denying a connection to a spiritual teacher or a higher version of herself due to fear, or was she protecting herself from a menacing spirit? She said she was also intrigued behind the meaning of the crow bones in the wine. So,
Okay.
Cher, what do you think?
Well, I have some notes.
This is a really interesting dream.
Yeah, and I feel like the more I went through it, it was like the perfect, like it was a clean metaphor, really, the way it
Yeah,
played out. At first, I was like,
totally.
what is going on? But by the end of it, I was like, okay. And then hearing her associations, I was like, all right, I feel what's coming here. But my first question, actually, as I was reading the dream, was whether she woke up because of her anxiety. Was she afraid? Like maybe she could have trusted the process. Maybe it seemed skeptical. That was what I was wondering. Or maybe he was invasive and like a temptation or shadow aspect trying to infiltrate the space. And I feel like she was also maybe intuitive and right to be skeptical and to remove herself from that space. Um, and there was one other thing I had on this. Oh, because she said, of course, then after I had that thought, she was like, oh, I was doing COVID vaccinations at the time. I felt like being in that space. I mean, there's two strong sides to that debate during that time, whether that was good for you or not. And people also had side effects from it. So I could imagine there's so much fear around that. And it's like it's worthy of skepticism because it's like they all felt something was off. And this figure comes in almost like disguised. And I feel like a flock of crows, what I think of is, yeah, often a dark setting like death or an omen, it's prophetic. So he's coming in and they're like, I don't know about this guy. But and putting bones in the wine, I feel like wine is like a drink that represents life force or blood or immortality, and putting bones in there is like almost affecting it, making it murky. It's like affecting the blood. And that there's been a lot of talk about how it clogs the, what is it, the blood vessels, or what is it? I don't know if you know, but I just remember hearing something about it being clogged up and causing
Yeah,
clots.
blood clotties.
Blood clots, that's
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah. And so it feels like it's completely mirrors that whole conversation. And I feel like, yeah, maybe she held back for a reason. Like maybe there was, the dream was almost warning her of the health effects potentially. And there was one other thing. Yeah, I mean, looking at the symbols, I had some thoughts, but I wanted to see what else came up when I looked up crow and
Hmm.
bone. And of course, it's like it can, on the positive side, crow or raven can be transformation or wisdom. So it could be like bringing insight, bringing her a message, but it also indicates death, just like bone does. But then on the contrary, it also represents strength. So there's like a dichotomy. But in general, if you think of crows and bone, I'm thinking of like a dark fantasy novel where there's, yeah, bad characters. And then the last thing I observed was she mentioned how there was an expert sitting at the table. Is it Anthony Hopkins? Avery Hopkins. Who's Anthony Hopkins? I don't know.
The actor.
Uh, oh yeah, yeah.
Which is funny because
Oh
he's an
my gosh.
actor in
Yes,
horror movies and like
you're
he's always
right.
in those dark movies.
He's in Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah. Good
Oh my
wordplay
gosh.
for sure.
um, it made me think of, and who is it? Fauci? What's his name?
Oh my God.
He he was an
Ah,
expert at the time.
it's
He was
got both the words.
an uh oh, is that his name? What is it? What's his first name?
Anthony, yeah.
Anthony. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was trying to say. So Fauci at the time was the expert telling everyone it's safe. And so it felt like that mirrored that as well, because she was like, oh, there's this person and we're supposedly supposed to trust him and he's telling us it's okay.
Wow, I love those word plays. I didn't pick up any of that. I love that. I also really
Great.
like what you said about like, yeah, like drawing all the very the very obvious connections between the time of the dream and the dream itself, the literal connections, like the bone and the wine, like wine as blood and bone as death. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And dreams a lot of the time, not always, because a lot of dreams can have to do with our life, not in its linear form, but in its nonlinear form. So like the timing of the dream is not necessarily always important, but I think the timing of this dream is very important and has a lot to do with like the experience of that particular time that she was having the dream. Um, I I started with the question of what did she want to know, and I so she said I was curious who the shapeshifter was and if I was denying a connection to a spiritual teacher or a higher version of myself due to fear, or was I protecting myself from a menacing spirit? Um, I had the same, like when I first read this dream, I had the same images and feeling as you, as like, oh, I feel like I'm in like a little horror novel. You know, like everything about just the colors, the specifications of the colors, the tones, the feeling mentions, the symbols. A group of crows is or ravens is often called a murder, or it's called a storytelling, is like the lesser known
What?
name for a flock of ravens or crows. And that's really interesting because in when I was looking more into this dream, both of those connotations kind of came up for me. Um, so that's kind of where I ended, but I'll start from the beginning. If the question is like, is this dream about my avoiding something out of fear, or is this dream about my protecting myself out of like fear of something that's real that I should be afraid of? So I said, like usual, we'll start with the title. The title, she titled the dream "Uninvited Guest." To me, that's like the first. The title is really interesting because it's not just a title. When you start listening to people's dreams and then asking them to give a title, you'll start to recognize that the titles often hold like subconscious undercurrents of the dream that are not necessarily obvious in just the dream or obvious to the dreamer themselves. And like the title can kind of give away some emotional aspects or emotional undertones that are, you know, like otherwise not just like totally obvious. So the title Uninvited Guest kind of does that for me. Uninvited being like an indication of something invasive, uninvited energy, uninvited guest, something, you know, we don't, you know, sometimes good things can come into our lives that aren't necessarily intended or invited, but usually uninvited has a connotation of something negative, especially if it's uninvited guests, you know, um,
Like a vampire.
yeah, exactly. Very
Like,
vampire vibes in this
yeah.
dream.
Yeah. I was just thinking because he wanted to go in, but they didn't let him. That made me think like, oh, like a vampire needs permission to come in.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Good one. And this has a lot of other symbols and like connotations of life force and like the stealing of life force and invasive actions of vampire. If it bites you, that's quite invasive. And
True.
bones
Yeah.
with blood too, because that's like the meeting of bone or teeth with blood or wine.
Oh my gosh. This is like a H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe's crossover, like Neil Gaiman. It gives
Totally.
all of that. Yeah.
Needles are very like also like yeah, the extraction of blood is like very vampiric, even though I guess yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I said, like symbols and associations are always personal, but if it were my dream, the colors and the tones were on like the gradient of being a darker dream than a light of maybe a darker dream asking me to protect myself rather than a lighter dream asking me to like have courage in the face of a great teacher or master. But I do think that that's also like that's where I start. That's like my shortest answer. But the more I think about it, I think there's also a deeper message to the dream that's not at so dualistic and actually incorporates both aspects, and is more unified than just like kind of a dark versus light, good versus bad. I think both aspects can be unified within this dream. And like her question of, is this, am I rightfully avoiding something or am I wrongfully not taking something in? I think both are correct. And that's what I kind of concluded on. So, but I'll get to there in a moment. So yeah, just on the surface, the color tones, the greens, the purples, the black, the drink turning black, the bones in the drink, crows, like you said, considered with death or associated with death and the spirit world. And then of course the feelings of the dream. The feelings of the dream are even more important than the obvious details, the surface level aesthetics. So, you know, like no matter how you or I feel about the symbols in the dream, the fact is that the dreamer herself listed feeling words such as suspect, distrust, feeling weird, feeling invaded. So like
True.
that's all very much the most prominent giveaway to what the dream is asking me to do if this were my dream. Um, so then of course, the scene of like, so the crows show up at this dinner party and one of the birds attempts to invade the house. And to me, this could be a symbol of an invasion of personal space. And that doesn't necessarily have to be physical. It could also very much be mental space. So the invasion of beliefs or ideas and thoughts or ideologies that aren't necessarily my own or fitting with me or good for me and beneficial for me. So a house, like in Jungian psychology, houses usually represent the mental space, the mind. So, and the different layers of the mind. So I would say that's what I would pull from that part of the dream. And then, of course, the potential, there's then followed by a potential deceit moment concerning the drinks and whether they're poison or medicine, which, like you said, ties very well into the actual date and time of this dream, which is during COVID, which was a great point of the question of what is medicine and what is poison, also paired with the invasive thoughts of who to trust and who to believe and what ideas do we let into our mind or not. And then there's the very interesting presence of an alchemist and the like presence of the person who can, it's the archetype of one who can turn medicine into poison and vice versa. So then like the middle ground of both those things. And I think that also weaves into like the greater potential for this dream. So I think that my shortest and direct answer or description of this dream is that if it were my dream, I do not see the characters in this dream, the bird or crow, I do not see them as a higher version of myself or a benevolent spiritual teacher. But for the reasons I just described, and the fact that everything seems kind of like obscured with trickery. And so just on that note, I would ask myself, where in my life am I being tempted by something that doesn't quite feel right? And although this dream was, like happened 2 years ago, if it's being brought up and asked about right now, if it's still on my mind, then there's still questions to be answered or themes to be explored. So it's still relevant. So again, I'd ask myself, where in my life am I being tempted by something that doesn't quite feel right or feels invasive or feels intrusive or just feels off? And then I would say, where in my life am I being asked to ingest something that doesn't seem right, whether it is physical, material, or non-material, like beliefs and ideas. So, but then I have a level deeper to go that integrates the other question of the dream. But I'll see if you wanted to add anything in before we go there.
No, I like that you're bringing up the emotional and more mental aspect of it. Like, of course, the obvious shows up with the context, but what you're saying with one, that it's coming up now and how it's something to integrate, and that it's like a self integration. It's not even like, am I being warned, or is there something I'm missing out on, or it's like, what is it that within me I need to be asking myself to move forward, that seems to be embedded in this dream. So I love that. It's like a deeper
Totally.
layer.
Yeah. Um, so then, but I want to go a level deeper because the questions are also intuitive. Like when you're asking someone like, what do you want to know about this dream? Both sides are intuitive. There's like a debate, like, is this a spiritual? So there's some part, if it were my dream, and that's my question, I would think that there is some part of me that thinks there might be a spiritual teaching in here. And so what I concluded was that I don't think the character in the dream was a spiritual or benevolent teacher or a version of my higher self. However, I do think the dream itself is a spiritual teaching.
Mm.
And so I do think it's both in that way. I think that the characters in the dream represent, like I said, like non-benevolent ideas or forces or energies or people or aspects of my life. But the dream itself is a spiritual teaching and is a benevolent dream in general or as a whole. Because,
Right.
well, not only are dreams always on our side, even negative dreams are always trying to help us grow and evolve and in some sort of benevolent and positive light, even if at their surface they are nightmares or difficult or challenging or present in like this dark form. Dreams are always, like, especially if we work with them with that perspective, we can always alchemize them into something that is beneficial for us. So, what I said about this dream is I said that although I don't think that the character is a spiritual teacher or benevolent force, I do think that the simulated experience that is this dream is a benevolent force, as in it is showing me and how to and asking me to strengthen my intuition and gut feelings and stand by them. And like I did with not letting the crow in my house. And then when I had another opportunity, I kind of was like on the fence and like stepped in a little and then, like spat it out. And and like in that way, in the way we're able to like use a simulated experience like this to hone in on like a gut feeling and then apply that to life, we're able to start alchemizing any darkness that we're experiencing into light. And I also said that um, because the Avery Hopkins character was really interesting to me. Like that was a big standout detail to me in this dream, an alchemist sitting at the table. And so I said that this to me, he represents that this process of alchemizing and this process of like initiation into selfhood and trusting my gut and my inner feelings in the face of all this like obscure trickery is a process, and it's a skill set and it's a moment of initiation. Because for me, an alchemist represents all of those things. They represent people who are very intentional about what they do, have a very specific skill set that's wide ranging, and that are initiated. Being an alchemist is an initiation, so that and in this initiation, I'll be able to determine for myself and strengthen the aspect of myself that lets me know what is, right or wrong for me, no matter what cosmic force is represented by the crows or society represented by the dinner party is saying or doing.
Mm. And I feel like with each layer of the dream, how it played out with what you're saying, it's almost like from the very first second of the dream, her intuition is telling her something is awry, like something's eerie with the murder of crows coming in. It's almost like, oh, I'm seeing that this figure that's in front of me now, I saw what they were before they transfigured themselves into maybe something that I could trust. So it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm just thinking of myself when I'm listening to that, and I reflect back on the sequential, like, symbols of the dream. For me, would be how often do I get a gut feeling, but because they morph into maybe something that's more acceptable, palatable, that I'm like, maybe I'll suggest it. You know, if there's like a bunch of crows dropping bones in your wine glasses, you're gonna be like, no. So I'm thinking like, oh, every chance she got, and then even the I'm not sure, and then noticing this, and then listening to that person, and even when she drank it, she took her time. So it was like the whole thing was like resistance, resistance, resistance.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but it's so easy. I know that I personally catch myself resisting while having that gut feeling that I could have listened to. So yeah, relating to that integration that you're speaking to.
Totally. It's very, very, very relatable. And I feel like every time we do trust our gut or finally like go with our gut instincts, even though our mind is involved and like giving us all a bunch of other options, that every time we do that, there is like we gain a depth of spiritual knowledge, and it is almost like little micro initiations into our becoming and into our being able to individuate and become more of ourselves, no matter what is going on around us externally.
Yes. And it's like outside of her house, like you said. It's like the
Totally.
first line of defense. I picture them sitting on the
Oh, yeah.
balcony. Uh, yeah, that it's happening outside of her as well.
Yeah. First line of defense for sure. That's really interesting. I would, what would I say? I said, oh, here's some questions I wrote down in terms of like, um, spiritual teachings of like the stream brings up for me spiritual teachings of how to protect my energy, how to follow my gut feelings and associations, and how to stand independent of a group when I don't necessarily feel comfortable with what everybody else is doing. Um,
That's a good one.
so so I would ask myself, if this were my dream, what situations in my life are reflecting this for me? How can I use this dream and apply the same acts in my life of courage and like gut bravery, and by not integrating or not allowing in beliefs that I am weary or unsure of, even if I'm told it's something else. And these are the spiritual teachings of the dream. So, yeah, I do think that this dream is both. I think it's a spiritual teaching and a spiritual warning. And
I'm
it's just and they're both at the same time, like a lot of dreams are.
Yeah, and when you said that all dreams or teachings or all experiences, it makes me think of, yeah, in life, some of the worst experiences are some of the best lessons in
Right.
teaching. And
Totally, exactly.
because I have the dream up on my screen, and I highlighted a bunch of words when I was going through it. And I'm staring at this one, and it's the I spit it back into the cup. And I'm thinking about how that just perfectly wraps up almost the teaching of the dream, like releasing almost all the outside influences or things that you maybe have digested or are willing to take in, and just like it's almost like purging that, and they're like, spit it out, don't take it in anymore.
I love that. That's
Like, don't
such a good
swallow, like don't swallow it. That feels like, yeah.
don't swallow it. It yeah, and that's a great detail. It reminds me of I've sat in circles before where if somebody says something negative about themselves or self-deprecating, they will be asked to go and like go outside and spit that out.
No way.
Yeah.
I
So as
love
a
that.
physical act, I know I should do that more often.
I'm just gonna tell everyone that you go spit that out right
Spit
now.
it out.
That's great.
we talk a lot about how dreams can be both literal and symbolic at the same time. And that was another note I made. I mean, I've kind of already talked about this, but I think if on if this were my dream, the literal connotations are about like would be about the time period of the dream, and all of that is still relevant now because there's a lot of things in our world that are considered neutral or beneficial that are poisonous. And so that this is like a time it's a dream that keeps giving. But on its symbolic level, I find the dream as a very like mythical dream. To me, that's how I would categorize it in my dream categories. Because not only do I usually my sense for mythical dreams is they usually come in this kind of mechanical form, as in that they're very cinematic, they're very clear, they have a clear narrative, like a beginning and an end. They're not scattered, they're not like kind of random, they're very just like it could be a movie, you know? Those are my mythic dreams are usually like that. Um, and so this dream to me, I thought was, I said was in its symbolic form, a mythic dream about greater path and greater purposes in life and about the archetypal energy that I'm aligning with right now. Um, and a lot about the path of the eternal self, like the day-to-day self, but also the eternal self. And this moment of initiation of like self into selfhood and maturity and individuation. So like this moment where in the mythic self or on the eternal timeline where I'm being presented with roads and paths and I'm being tested of sorts in terms of like tested and to be initiated into a place of greater evolution and greater selfhood and maturity in the fact that I'm being asked to strengthen my intuition and listen to my guts and listen to my inner knowing and inner feelings, even if what I'm being presented with on the outside is very, you know, especially when things are obscured. And so I think that, yeah, this dream for me would be, especially if she said she is in the practice of medicine and is studying spiritual teachings of medicine. Then this dream is an interesting, like I would say if this were my dream, like this my purpose and place in this life has something to do with the archetypal forces of being a healer. And right now I'm like playing in the archetypal energy of healing and magician. And I'm also being asked then on the initiation in this path to strengthen this skill set to move forward.
Yeah, when I looked up the further symbolism of raven and crow, that came up. It said that the raven was a solar bird sacred to Apollo. You mentioned the sun, and that the 3 feet were an emblem of the Chinese emperors because it corresponded to the solar symbolism of dawn, noon, and dusk. It makes me think of how you say mythical dreams have its beginning, middle, and end. It's
Yeah,
almost like it starts off with these, yeah, the crows or ravens, and it's like almost opening up like the curtains of a story, connecting, yeah, that what you just said, like that initiation from beginning, middle, and end to ascending to a higher place, like kinghood, queenhood. Yeah.
totally. I feel like, yeah, totally. I mean, no matter what our day-to-day lives look like, we are always playing out archetypal roles, and those will become most present in our dreams or more obvious in our dreams. I believe they become present in our life, but I feel like on the day-to-day, the way to keep in touch with those energies and to track them is through remembering dreams and working with dreams. I would say, we all access all the archetypes. And I think in different times of our lives, some come present more strongly. This dream to me is a mythic dream, as in it is a place, it is a dream where I'm being shown the archetypal energies that are closest to me right now, that I'm working with right now, and it's kind of like a footnote or a tracking or a moment in not only my temporary day-to-day life, but my eternal timeline, where I'm being given a moment, a test, an opportunity to strengthen my spiritual forces in whatever way that means to me.
Yeah, and as you say that, I'm like zooming out. If we were to review the dream again and cut all the details out, it's just simply like life and death.
Totally.
That's it.
Totally.
And
And
everything
it's
in
like,
between to navigate between life and death.
absolutely. And it's so cool that like, it's like a lot of times this dream is cool too, because if you go all the way to like the mythical part of it and the archetypal part of it, and then move all the way back up to like the day to day, and what's happening just in daily life, and connect the two, you can see how like our day to day lives actually are playing out these like massive, epic, archetypal stories and sagas and forces, and we just don't really notice.
True.
Until we get something like this dream, which really connects the two, because it can span from one to the other and fill in the blanks and connect us and show us how, yeah, our day-to-day lives might seem routine and mundane and common, but actually here's a level to look at your day-to-day life that's on like the eternal level, the mythic level, and how it translates in that deeper reality, which is always really interesting.
I love that. I feel like that feels really inspiring and uplifting to even just look at everything happening in my life day to day as a story, or connecting it to my own or the collective mythology to bridge that. It almost feels like something we've talked about before. It reconnects the individual into the collective, like, oh, I'm a part of this story too. It almost cures any sense of isolation or loneliness. Like, it's not that no one understands what I'm going through. Actually, I'm playing a role that is so, I guess, important, but also so common in some ways, but unique.
Yeah,
well.
totally.
Yeah.
It's so true. It really does cure a sense of loneliness and isolation, like in a very deep and satisfying way, not only to the conscious mind, but like it really satisfies the subconscious mind in my personal experience. Because like, if say like take this dream, say I feel like I'm being connected with the archetypes of healers and magicians, then that means that I'm connected with, and I can feel the connection with and have the direct experience of the connection with every healer and every magician who's ever existed, both in history and mythology. Yeah. And like we're all playing out those roles. I mean, you can see that in Vedic astrology is a great way, like Claire Nochte's work of like comparing nakshatras to like how like when artists share placements and how they then like present their narratives and the movies they make and the stories they write, and they're all really similar, and you're like, oh, because
cool.
Yeah, they're all channeling this eternal form, an eternal form of an eternal archetype, and that connects all of us together throughout time and space, whether alive or not.
It actually, yeah, because it shows up essentially in our charts, just in the astrology aspect. And tying those two in, it's like actually you can almost see the archetype that you tend to show up in the world as. It's like it's right there. I think it's usually the midheaven, but there's many other influences too.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier today, actually, because somebody was I was listening to some political commentary, and he was like, yeah, people see this particular political leader as a hero. And I was like, just like thinking about how important it is to use dreams. Well, dreams are just the most direct and natural and easiest way to connect directly with archetypes, in my belief, in my experience. but I'm like, how important it is to connect with the archetype of the hero and to be your play that for yourself and not externalize that archetype and project it onto other people, especially people just given to you as like, this is your hero. It's like, that is like, it's not really viable anymore. There's too much, I mean, in my opinion, there's just too much corruption to see anybody in a real place of power as being your hero. I would I would advise anyone to avoid that. But that archetypes exist no matter what. So it's like, are you gonna project it onto somebody else, or are you going to project it onto yourself and learn and see what that role is like for you, and see how that archetype shows up in your dreams, how you play that in your dreams, and how you do it on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, the importance of like re reassociating all of these archetypes and eternal forms with parts of ourselves and seeing how they come up in our life. And if it's not obvious in your day-to-day life, then it'll be obvious in your dream life in some way.
Yeah, and besides dream, the first thing that popped into my head was stories. Movies is how the majority of people connect to archetypes nowadays, since, of course, the dream practice is something that's needing to be revitalized with the majority. But what you were saying, immediately I was like, Dune. It has made a resurgence. And the entire story of Dune that people tend to, not quite understand at first, people go into it and they're like, oh, this is a hero's journey. This is a hero's story. But technically, it's a story of how power can corrupt you. And the
Wow.
hero, I don't know if you know Dune, but the hero is actually a villain's arc, but it doesn't show that way at all. It's very subtle. And it's actually the story arc that inspired Anakin Skywalker's ascension to Darth Vader. So that's it. It's pulled from Dune. And so Frank Herbert wrote that, actually, and he intended it to be that way. But when it first came out, people saw Paul Atreides as a hero, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we want to be like Paul." And he was like, "No one really understood what I was trying to say." So he continued the series, and that's when he wrote Dune Messiah, the second part, where he shows that manipulation of power and the complications of someone ascending to that much power, and how it takes them in a different direction, and how prophecy gets people to look for messiah figures when it's all political schemes being woven over time. That actually, so that's the entire story of Dune. If you haven't seen it, I know
Wow.
that's pretty much the message of it. So it's very timely right now with what you're saying, and the fact that it's making a resurgence in pop culture now. Yeah.
Totally. Wow, and yeah, that has to do with the literal aspects of the dream and the time that the dream was had. That's all very, very relevant themes.
Yeah.
And it has, even on a personal level, you said like the journey to the hero's journey, but that like is corrupted. And I think that also is like comes forth in the dream, in the character of the alchemist, and the question of poison and medicine, and the reason why that one would have an initiation dream or initiatory experience when studying or dealing with these kinds of things or these certain practices is because I think in I mean, I could change my mind. I I might change my mind on this, but in this moment, I feel like initiations, one aspect of initiations is you basically, it's a pledge to your intentions of what you are going to do with the knowledge you are gaining. And at the end of the day, intentions like are either kind of like, I'm going to use this for only good, or I'm going to be very ambiguous about how I'm going to use this, you know? And it's
Dang.
like, and so
Yeah.
this could be one of those interesting initiatory moments of like while I'm studying this, while I'm practicing this in my day-to-day, studying it in my day-to-day, and channeling this eternal archetype of healer, of magician, now might be a good time to get very clear on my intentions for this journey and my intentions for understanding this practice and using it with other people.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole transmutation process, isn't it? Like poison to medicine.
Right.
Way.
Totally.
It's funny because I'm connecting it again to the story because before his timeline splits into a darker timeline, he drinks a poison water. That initiates him into that role. So wow. When he said that, I was like, oh, another parallel. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's also archetype. I mean, I believe yeah, it's Shiva, right? Who drinks poison, but like he's like the ultimate alchemist because he drank the poison, but he was able to have it stay in his throat instead of being ingested by his entire bloodstream. And so that's a story of like a way to like completely alchemize the duality between poison and medicine and good and bad and right and wrong and be in like a unified moment instead of a dualistic moment. I wish I knew more details of that story, but
yeah, that sounds really
cool. Look it up.
I'm just like suddenly curious now because like the fact that it stays at the throat immediately, I think it doesn't go to the heart. If it went to the heart, one, that's death, but it can also represent poisoning your heart, letting things that you take in actually affect your heart. Then that would change you as a person. That would make you go cold or dark or take a more evil-like path, would be to have a poisoned heart. So curious, like that it stays at the throat, and that's where we communicate too. It's almost like thinking of like transmuting with like words or speaking up for oneself, or I don't know. But yeah, I'm curious how the rest of that story with Shiva goes.
Yeah, totally. I love that. What you said about not letting it get to your heart, because it's like it's the same thing. It's like you can use your voice to talk about many different kind of things and express and explore different sides of all things, but letting something get into your heart and integrate into your bloodstream and become a sense of self, like identifying as part of yourself, is a whole different story.
Right. And that's it. Like that, I feel like wraps up the theme of the dream. Just like don't take it in, spit it out.
Spit it out.
It's not yours.
Totally. I looked it up, and it is a Shiva story, and yeah, you can look it up. I'm not going to retell it right now.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. Well, is there any other notes? I think
that was it for me.
Great.
Yeah, that was it for me. Yeah. Okay, uninvited guest.
Feel complete too. You know, that's a really good point. It's like the title just went over my head. I didn't really take that in as the theme, but that's so true. Like the title has such an importance to the reflection of what the dream is. And that immediately sets the tone like, okay, there shouldn't even be a question after that.
Right. Totally. It actually made me think, just real quick, I'll end on an honorary action that the dreamer could do in like playing with the title. If this were my dream and I wanted to work with it, I might even just like write a list of like uninvited guests and invited guests, and you can make it really literal. Like, who would I invite into my home and why, and who would I not invite into my home and why, and just do something like that as a way to kind of like start that process of, like we were talking about, that process of like getting very clear on my intentions for my work and what I practice and study and apply to others.
I love that so much. I feel inspired to do that list myself. I think everyone could do that.
Yeah.
As an assessment. Yeah, that's really fun.
I love it. Sweet.
All right.